Now I get the joy to bring a social scientist and a fertilizer analyst together on a panel. So this is your time to ask questions. I've got a few prepared here, but I don't think any question is really off the table. So if I see somebody at one of the mics, I hope that there's long lineups because I only have a few questions prepared and I think we've got 45 minutes. So start thinking about those questions. So the way that I was hoping to take this panel discussion, no, Gunther, you can't go already. Is around, in Canada, many of you guys are probably aware, around the new fertilizer reduction and maybe some of the disinformation or misinformation that has come along with that. And then also, how do we connect that fertilizer reduction policy to the consumer? Because we all know that with that fertilizer reduction, there is going to be direct impacts to that consumer, especially at the grocery store with store prices. So my first question is for Cami. No, I promised her I would not ask her a fertilizer question.
Don't ask me a fertilizer question.
And I think, when it comes to disinformation, and we see it on social media and stuff, but as farm organizations, as farmers, as industry professionals, we always tend to be reactive instead of maybe proactive. So what would you recommend? Like, how can we be maybe better proactive than always just be reactive in this whole disinformation, misinformation?
Well, we are reactive. I think that that's our very nature. But also, I think what might be helpful, not that you want to burden the organizations with more bureaucracy, but I think sometimes if you develop strategic roles or strategies, period, around it, and you're working as an organization toward that, with that whole element of switching things a bit and being more anticipatory, I think that that creates good opportunities. I've been really trying in our regulatory organization to push for this anticipatory thing, and our scientists are like, I don't get that. That's weird. I said, all I'm saying, we have some really good products in the pipeline. Now, they're not coming out for 5 or 10 years, and that's fine. But what we should be doing now is thinking, how are they going to be problematized and politicized when they are launched? Don't handle it at launch. Like, let's talk about it now. We're not going to get all the stories because there are some very creative people out there. But we can think about it so that we can hit the ground running if the fertilizer hits the fan. And so I just think that anticipatory is a big thing, but as a company, I know our company specifically, most businesses, we don't think that way. We don't think that way about this stuff. We just treat it like whack-a-mole. We just go, okay, we'll just fix this. You never fix it. It's going to go on and on. They're just going to shift to the next thing. So how do we think about, how do we capture the narrative way ahead of product launch? Or how do we capture the narrative, say we know that the government is going to come out in 2 days with some sort of new policy that's obviously going to affect us all. We have to be able to hit the ground running with those kinds of things and anticipate those things so we can manage it and make those connections with the consumer in the headlines, because clearly that's all they read.
Yeah, and I might be guilty of that sometimes, so. Okay, moving over to Josh. I know what the most common question is that you usually get is, what is the price? What is the price of fertilizer going to do? So I'm not going to ask you that. But I'm wondering if you could share, like, you're pretty active on social media, especially with, where fertilizer prices have been. Do you get interaction from, like, the general public, or what are some of the questions that they ask you, and has that increased since this whole federal government war on fertilizer has started?
Yeah, a lot of the question I usually get is, why in the hell is this happening? Everybody's just looking for information. I mean, fertilizer is one, you talk about free information. It's not out there. The reason I started my presentation, I show you my positions or lack of, is because most of the information in this marketplace, it comes from the top down. The companies that have the funds to be able to have a group to go through and analyze the market is the production side. Well, guess what? They are long every single day of the year, so guess what they are? They're bullish. I don't say this to say that they're manipulative or anything like that, but there's going to be a general bias. And then if you get some information from traders, well, same thing. If they're long or they're short, that's what they're going to talk. So trying to get more information out there. I mean, fertilizer is one of the highest cost per acre, and it is one of the hardest things to get as far as information goes. So it's just a lot of people are always asking, why? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? Why do I care about Lithuania? Why do I care about China? Why does natural gas in Europe matter? Why does the Russia-Ukraine invasion matter? It's the desire for knowledge is out there. It's just that the information is not there. And I think, you know, when you get to social media and things like that, I learn a lot from Twitter. I've got some connections in China that I get a lot of stuff from them that I never would have gotten without social media and those sorts of things. I'm one that always sits there and preaches, don't trust a lot of the information out of China. A lot of it is controlled. I can tell you, when I was in Melbourne, Australia, we had an office in Beijing. Went up there for like a week tour, went and saw some production facilities, went to go tour a port. The port crew took us out to dinner. They got drunker than I've ever been in my entire life. Let me tell you, you go to China and the port crew sits there and says, we're going to take you to dinner. And they sit you at the round table and the hierarchy and they get you all settled and everything. They start walking up these little clear glasses with clear alcohol. They go, oh, toast of friendship. And you're like, well, crap, it'd be rude not to do. Take a shot. And the next person comes up and says, oh, we must toast to business. Well, yeah, business is great. Take another shot. Guys, I didn't make it out of the freaking restaurant. Loved our people to death, and I didn't trust a word that they said. But with social media, you can find some people that are willing to buck the trend and risk it and get that information out there. So, yeah, it's the most common question is just why?
Yeah, and Josh is very correct about China. I had the opportunity to go on a trade mission to China, and they didn't prepare me well enough. Like, I think I should have started drinking every day leading up to that trip, because you don't do business in China until you create a relationship. And how you create a relationship is having a few drinks. And also, you have to eat what's on your plate. So I just remember when they served me a pig's foot, and I just closed my eyes and I pretended I was not eating a pig's foot.
And there's no few drinks about it.
Yeah, there's no few drinks.
They get a chance to go out and drink for free, they are taking full advantage of it.
Yeah. Okay, so Gunther, I have one more question, then I'll ask you, so you can ask your question then. But so you both kind of said, like, we need to get ahead of it, we need to talk about it, people want to know why. But some issues are easier to explain to the public than others. So, for example, I'm also a cattle rancher, so when the whole beef labeling thing, you know, that was pretty easy for us to communicate, and we had a pretty, you know, quick success on that issue. GMOs, other story. That's very technical. A lot more communication is needed, and it's not as easy for the public to understand. So and then we faced, you know, many years of public debate over GMOs and so on. So the issue of fertilizer use and reduction, do you think it's an easy one for the public to understand or not? And how do we explain it?
So I am very much a bull in a china shop. I like fighting fights. I know, it's just shocking. I'm usually very reserved. And I like stuff like that. I'm sick and tired of agriculture in general just kind of sitting back and taking our shots and just trying to play nice with everybody. The other side doesn't want to play nice. You want to reduce fertilizer applications 35%? We had this conversation back in the corner after I got done. Fine, let's have that conversation. Government officials, you want to reduce our things by 35%? We're going to reduce food production. Who are we going to go kill? Just that blunt. Well, what do you mean? That's a very loaded statement. How dare you say something so insensitive? I'm being very sensitive. Because you can either go just end them now, quick and painless, or you can make them starve to death. Because studies have shown if we sit there and we don't have fertilizer, we don't use the GMOs and things like that, there's 1 billion people on earth that are going to die. Let's start using those sorts of statistics. Let's take the fight back to them. I'm very much a person that I'm tired of fighting, backing up. These things have got to be met head on. Trust me, I have not yet met a farmer out there who, if I were to go to him and say, hey, if you could raise the same yield but do it with 1/3 less fertilizer, would you do it? She'd let me think half a second. Of course I would do it. And are we working towards that sort of stuff? Of course we are. Does the modern farmer try to do things to keep the soil in place and make sure it doesn't run off and we don't lose nutrients to the waterways because that just means wasted costs going down the river systems and everything else? Yes, these are things we're trying to do, but they are looking at us from the 50s and the 60s. I personally think it's a fight we need to start having a lot more confrontational. The other side has no problem having that confrontation. We've got to be willing to fight. Like I said, bull in the trash.
It sounds, Josh sounds a lot like Jim Wickett, doesn't he? For those who know.
I think those are really good points because I think there are voices out there that are very strong and can, push the envelope that way. And I think it's important. I think we're awfully kind in agriculture, and that's why I love this community, because we are so kind. But I mean, when you think about these complexities, remember I was talking about empty spaces, right? So if the government decides, well, this is what we're going to do going forward, we want to reduce emissions from fertilizers by 30%, right? Is that it, right? 35%. Okay. Well, and I didn't know much about this before I came, so I did a little bit of research, not much. But I thought the first things that popped up on the radar was a ban. And then the next thing I saw was reducing fertilizer use. So it took me a while to find out that it was about emissions from fertilizer. I'm that person. This is not my wheelhouse. So I finally got there. But the thing is I know what I'm trying to look for. The average consumer does not. And I think, we talk about storytelling and how important it is. And I think some of us are getting a little cynical, a little fatigued by it, that we have to do it. But there has to be ways to connect the dots better for consumers. Because we, as human beings, like to take those cognitive leaps, we have to find reasons and ways to help them slow down their thinking around certain things. And kind of pull back on some of the assumptions that they might make. And that is on us as an industry. But I do think we can push the politicians a little more, because the other thing is, I talk about empty spaces today. Everything that I read about this proposed reduction in emissions from fertilizers, there wasn't anything in there that said, well, how are you going to do it? Like, if I were a farmer looking at this, I'm going like, well, okay, but what are we going to do? Or what's the proposal? And to me, you're creating that's irresponsible, because you're creating blank spaces not only for the people that are growing the food, but for the consumers themselves. But the thing is, the consumers don't know, they don't have all the information.
Yeah, and Cami and I had this conversation in the back before we started, and our current government in Canada is, tends to do that a lot. They say something, they set a goal, they set a target, but they leave out the details and the how, which creates our industry maybe to go in a little bit of a panic, to go into a defense mode, and it creates that more misinformation. Okay, Gunther, we'll take your question. Now we will.
Gunther Jochum, farm west of Winnipeg, Manitoba. I joined the Wheat Growers board of director about 5 years ago, I think. And right off the hop, I had the opportunity to meet with our federal ag minister, was in our office twice. And at the time we talked about the carbon tax, and the government really went ahead with their ideological climate change politics and agenda, I should say. And so we've kind of really pushed hard back against it, and we've shown what it will do to the primary food producer, and we haven't been back in the office since. And so when you push the government really hard, it's very easy for them to ignore you, right? So as an organization, how do we engage the government again without coming across as being disinformer or misinformer? Because they kind of put that label on us a little bit. And so, yeah, do we ignore the government and then maybe just go a different route? We have ideas, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow, but I'd like your thoughts on that.
I can tell you from our perspective, there's actually another study we worked on, I mentioned it earlier, Canadian fertilizer study, like an outlook. A lot of the times, these reports are done by the academic side. And boy, does it ever read like an academic side. You get about a page and a half in, you're like, well, I don't need, sleep pills or anything anymore. I got it covered. It's a document that doesn't help. But trying to put something in front of them that actually tells a story. You talk about some of the social media and things like that. Our attention spans are shorter than they've ever been. You've got to have something that A, grabs their attention, and B, is very quick and to the point. And maybe the fight on social media against individuals needs to be different than that with the government. The government is just an education. Show them the information. Say, guys, here's what's going on. Here's the difficulties. Here's what's coming up. Do you want your name attached to that? Because the voters sure are going to attach your name to it if we don't look at these sorts of things. I mean, it's an education, unfortunately.
I think there's opportunities as organizations to come together and collaborate on some of these things. To your point, by the way, I have a few scientific articles that you might be interested in reading. But I think what we've recognized in the science communication field is no matter what you do as an academic and you're trying to build evidence. I mean, there's some crazy people out there that want to manufacture data and stuff. But for the most part, most scientists are doing the job that they're doing. But we're terrible at translating our work. So I think that there is a shift right now in all of that. And I think social media has a lot to do with it because now we want information. Scientists are also seeing how their work is misinterpreted. So you see it misinterpreted, then you need to take that next step in translation, which means coming down to what you're talking about, Josh, is what's the meaningful stuff between this? This study and this study found this. Let's get it in a way that we can get people's attention with it. And with government, briefing documents are often effective, but it's who they come from that matters. So oftentimes, if it comes from a single person or a single organization, that might not be enough. You might want to have a collective of, from a fertilizer standpoint, that's not just wheat, it's all crops. So does that mean you get a number of grower groups together to kind of pull together and do a literature review and find all of this data and put it together in something that someone in administration is going to read? That's a possibility. But at the end of the day, it doesn't end there. You've got to go out on social media and you've got to talk about it, and not just once, over and over and over and over again. Because that's what people have to see. They have to see the same sound bites repeated over and over again, because that's what the other side does. That's what they do.
And they're good at it.
They are very good at it.
Any other questions? I see somebody going up to the mic.
Donald Orchard, Manitoba, BC combination. Carbon dioxide has been vilified lately. It is called a pollutant. Three things are necessary for all life on Earth: sunshine, water, and carbon dioxide. Is carbon dioxide, the current vilification, is it misinformation or is it disinformation? Cami, I'd just like an opinion.
It depends. It depends. Depends on who's saying it, what they're saying. But here's another thing for you. All life forms need sun, water, carbon dioxide. Well, if you stay in the sun too long, you can get cancer, skin cancer. If you can't swim and you're in a lake, in the middle of a lake, you'll drown. I mean, everything can be spun in whatever way possible. I mean, these people are magicians. So is it misinformation? Is it disinformation? I think it depends on what's being shared.
But my point is it deliberate or is it accidental because of ignorance, like misinformation?
I would bet both. It's like everything. It's a combination of everything. But there are individuals out there, organizations, that are very deliberative about the information they put out there not because they care about the environment, but because they care about this. And that's how they make money.
Jerry.
Yeah, I would say,
Oh, sorry.
you heard that almost 100% of people who ever drink water died. Exactly. No, and it goes back to the whole thing, though. I mean, I was saying earlier that I'm kind of the old Boy Scout mentality. I want to leave the world in a better place than I got it. Doesn't mean it's in a horrible place when we got it. There's nothing about trying to make it better, but the problem is, to your point, too many of these organizations have pushed it and said the green energy and this and that. Well, it's money. It's an income flow. And who was it? John Kerry started the whole thing. That guy's worth hundreds of millions of dollars because of what he's done. And people have figured out, if I can push the new narrative and I can put myself in the right spots, the same thing as DC politicians. Ooh, COVID's going on. I'm going to invest in stocks A, B, and C. It's getting ahead of the game. But yeah, it's get the information out there. Okay, yeah, CO2 and excess is bad. What puts on more? Cars on a highway or a volcano that erupts?
Well, and I like your idea there about narratives. Narratives now, we've always loved storytelling. That's what we are. We like to gather around the fire and kitchen table and tell stories, talk about our days. But the thing is now it looks different. We've got social media. So there's an immediacy about things. And that is attractive to anybody who can figure out a really good business strategy to work it. What's the new narrative? What's the new narrative? How can it make me money?
Okay, quick reminder, just make sure you guys are holding the mic because I'm getting the eyes from the video guy. You're good, it's Josh.
I move my hands a lot.
It's the typical male. Let's hold the microphone as low as I can hold it. Now Jerry.
Hi, Jerry Hertz from Edenwald, Saskatchewan farmer. Here's a quick case study for you. I spent 4 years with Saskanola, CCGA, and Canola Council of Canada. The number one fight I had was trying to get some of these institutions to be a little more aggressive with some major issues that we had, like the carbon pricing and all that stuff. The pushback I always got was, well, you know, we'd lose the ear of the government if we push too hard. So there's your case study. The CCGA did the exact opposite of what the wheat growers did, okay? Now, CCGA still has access to the government. The wheat growers don't. There's your opposites. The problem is that we're dealing with a government based on ideology. So whether you got the ear or not, it doesn't really matter. So, and the other fact is that we are trying to use practical, rational, people are going to die, but based on an ideology, that doesn't matter. So we're throwing darts at the wrong board, I think. I don't understand how we got two different approaches, we got two different results as far as the ear of the government, but neither of them are working at all with trying to access. And you said teaming together with the industry is doing a pretty good job of that through Canada now. I guess that's where my struggle is that the ideology that we're dealing with, we're not getting anywhere with what we're doing from that perspective, even though we're going at it from many different angles.
I'm gonna hold this really close.
Good job.
I would say, unfortunately, these fights that we're fighting, we can't expect immediate results. And this is something I see in society. This is deep rabbit hole. Beers later at the bar, we'll go down big old rabbit holes. But we are now entering a fight that has been waged for 5, 10, 20 years, right? You've got an entire generation that was brought up thinking one thing. We can't think that we're going to start fighting and within 6 months completely turn it around. It doesn't work that way. I mean, yeah, if you can find a government official that is willing to listen and learn and change their mind and do a different point of view and stuff like that, fantastic. That's a quick win. We'll take them. But ultimately, it's trying to educate the people. It's trying to educate the next generation. You're fighting a generational war. And those are not won within a matter of days or weeks or months.
And I think people in this room know that, especially with the wheat board. That did not take a year to make that go away. And even in our board meetings yesterday, it was talk about we need to think long-term on some of these policies. It's not a 1 month, 2 month, 1 year plan. It might be a 3, 5, 10-year plan. Anything else to add to that, Cami?
I did, and then it fell out of my head.
I'm sorry.
No, it's gone.
Oh, I see Alana has a question.
Hi, I'm Alana Cook. I'm a farmer from Saskatchewan. And so just to pick up on, kind of how frustrating it can be to make change, Caitlin, you made exactly the point about the wheat board. This time around, when the wheat growers haven't been invited back into a Minister of Agriculture's office, it's happened before, right? and so, I would urge the wheat growers to continue to do what they're doing as far as, being that rational voice out there, offering solutions and information. And just on the fertilizer issue, the work that the wheat growers did with their study with, I believe it was MNP, on costing out what the cost of the fertilizer reduction would be per acre, let alone the impact on food security because of reduced productivity, that is having an impact. Maybe you're not being invited back into the minister's office, but it's having an impact, and it's also influencing other organizations that do have access to the minister's office. So maybe not lots of organizations aren't as courageous as the wheat growers, but they have other drivers and shareholders and stakeholders that they worry about, I think, often too much, right? I think some of the organizations need to be more courageous and bold. But I guess all I would say is the wheat growers continue to have impact and influence, even if it's not directly, it's indirectly. They often don't get the credit they deserve, but that has been for 50 years, and it'll be for 50 more, because the wheat growers will hopefully still be here 50 years from now. So my question is regarding, voicing our concerns, and how can we connect, and Cami, you talked about, the conversations, the connections. So my question is, how do we channel our anger and frustration and do it positively, right? Like, how do you take, my angry husband, who we debate every morning over coffee. You can see he's the angry guy at that microphone. I'm the positive person over here.
Positive mic, negative mic.
How do we channel? I mean, honestly, we do need the passion and the frustration that Jerry has and many others, including me. How do we channel that to have the positive voice to keep plugging away, because this is a forever challenge for us? So how do we make sure that we get the right message out there despite the fact that we are angry and frustrated?
Wow. It's a loaded question, Alana, and I've got more insights into Jerry now. But I think this is the thing, and I've been doing this for quite a while, and I'm just going to tell you a personal story. I went through a little bit of a change. When I went and started working with Monsanto, I was overwhelmed for that first year because I was shifting into private sector mode, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Thanks, Trish, you helped me a lot. But I just pulled away from social media, not because I was afraid of it, but because I was just fatigued. And I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough, just enough room to say, you can back off, you can wait. See, we've got tricked into thinking, well, I need to respond to this now. You don't need to respond to it now. You can back off, you can think about it, you can cool down, whatever. It's not bad to be angry. You should be angry. You should be angry. I also think that there's something brilliant about, you were alluding to networks, like connecting and the dots, and there are some that the wheat growers are influencing that do have connections to government. You still got to work on these indirect links that you have and be purposeful about them. But the other thing is, and I've always said this, there is no one voice that can work. We have to mobilize different kinds of voices out there. And we were having a conversation at breakfast this morning about a certain individual with a very strong voice that some people love, but other people don't like at all. That's okay, because remember that slide that I showed with all the heuristics and the factors that influence how we process in real time? Different people are going to find different voices relatable. So we got to focus on a message. Yes, it's always important to have a vision and a message from an organizational standpoint, but we have to empower individuals to get out there and talk. And yes, get angry, but then maybe give yourself a break and pull back. Like, this is something that I noticed on social media, is there's a lot of people that say something before they maybe think about it a little bit. And you're not having less impact by waiting just a bit and thinking how you can reword that. And working with your networks, and I do it all the time. I go, look, this is what I want to say to respond to this, and I do it in my DMs and Twitter, and someone will say, well, you know, maybe you can try this. And I go, oh, okay, yeah, good idea. So work with other people that can kind of peer review your work, and then get the best message out there without losing your identity. Like, you're an individual, and Jerry, if you just, have at her. Like, just do it. Oh, sorry, maybe I didn't want me to say that. But I just think that different voices, the important thing is that we're all singing from the same song sheet. That's it. We need direction, we need vision, and we need purpose, but we need different people speaking out, because that's what the public wants.
That's great advice, Cami, about the share, like ask people your opinion. But my one experience was I had a tweet. I sent it in our Wheat Growers group chat, and I was told I wasn't harsh enough. So, and I thought that was like pushing too harsh. So I had to, yeah, depends who you consult with.
My advice, this afternoon, you're going to the Jack Daniel's distillery. So they're going to give out samples.
Okay, so I guess kind of switching tones, but when public trust social license kind of became, you know, a thing that everybody was talking about, it was all about share the science, share the facts, and then it kind of transformed to, no, you got to connect with common values, got to connect with the feelings. People don't care about the, you know, facts and science anymore. But then COVID-19 happened and the whole vaccine thing came up, right? And it was like science, science, facts, go back to the science, listen to the science. So I guess in your experience, what would your recommendation be? Like, share the facts and science, go back to the feelings, a little mixture of both, or how do you navigate this?
Well, I think that this is going to be a constantly moving piece of machinery, this relationship between science and society, and it's going to be issue-driven. So all of the factors could turn on its head. I've always felt that in social media, we have to do our very best to humanize ourselves and humanize the work that we do, period. That is first and foremost. People do not relate to institutions, organizations, or businesses. They relate to other people. I think one of the most powerful things that the industry did, and I don't know if you remember this, but I remember years ago, when I was working for Monsanto, we were probably one of the first companies that said, yeah, you guys go on social media, have at her. But the rest of the companies, we'd have it, and no one else could use social media, right? But that's changed. And I think that was powerful, and that needed to happen. These are the kinds of things that, what was the question? I kind of went like.
That's okay, keep going.
No,
But it was around like science and facts
science
versus
facts.
common values.
Okay, so I've always felt that you've got to lead with humanness. Now, sometimes when I tell people, well, this is, you know, I do social media training, I say, this is my formula. I have like a 60-40 formula. I do 60 kind of personal stuff, and people freak out about that, but I'll explain that in a minute, and then 40% work-related stuff. And the 60% personal is not personal, it's what I feel comfortable sharing. It's either a photo of my front pasture with my horses in it, it's a picture of my dog, it's a snippet of a conversation between my husband and I, because that's always interesting. I mean, these are the things that humanize you, because then all of a sudden, if you want to share a piece of science about gene editing or something, you have permission to, because people have already found you relatable. So I don't care what the issue is, vaccines, whatever. You have to tell your story. Because the other thing is that when the whole COVID thing came out, and I'm fully vaccinated, by the way. I went with the science on it, but don't judge me, you can, whatever. But what I learned was, you know, I got panicky at the beginning too, like many of us did, but I didn't listen always. And then I started listening to other stories and perspectives, and then I went, okay, here we go. I get it, I get it, I get it. But sometimes we don't stop and listen, and we're all kind of guilty of that. So I think you get permission to listen if you extend yourself in a way that other people find relatable. And you can always find common ground, but you're not going to do it when you're spewing science. You're just not. It doesn't work.
Oh, I see there, do you want to say anything? You're good? Go to Jeffrey.
Yep, good. Okay,
Hi, Jeff Hewson. I farm in Saskatchewan. Dr. Ryan, great presentation. And my next question, not really fertilizer related, so, but kind of. So, we've seen this unprecedented run of commodity prices, fueled in large part by the start of ethanol mandates, brought on early 2000s. And so since that time, we've seen a big increase in fertilizer application, in yields, a lot of that spurred on by the ethanol mandates. Do you have any thoughts on ethanol mandates? We're kind of seeing a peak and a plateauing, in gasoline consumption. Obviously it went down a lot with COVID. What are your thoughts on ethanol mandates? And I suppose if ethanol mandates were to be repealed and lowered, would potentially have a bearish impact on fertilizer use. So I guess ethanol mandates and vis-a-vis fertilizer use.
Okay, I'm going to say this part. Give me a second. You're going to get really angry at the first part, but I'm going to follow it up with another. I don't like the mandates. I hate the ethanol mandates. I think they're stupid. I don't think they ought to be in place. That said, I love the effect. I love the fact that the North American farmer has benefited from it. I like the idea that it's better for the environment. But I am very much a free market thinker, which means anytime the government tells me you should do this, the first thing I want to say is no. If the ethanol thing was so fantastic, they wouldn't need a mandate. So that's, like I said, I love it. Trust me, my family's done very, very well, just like everybody in this room has done very, very well because of it. And I'm all for that. I love farmers making money. It's about time. But to your point, one of the big things that we've talked about internally that could absolutely pull the rug, one of them is a recession. B is if all of a sudden we had DC come in and do away with the mandate. There were four senators, 2 Republican and 2 Democrat, coming from coal states, who sat there and started talking about trying to repeal the ethanol mandate. Now, it was largely just ignored, and they're just trying to get votes, they're a coal state, whatever. Stuff like that usually starts real small, and then it starts to grow. And there's a lot of environmentalists now who sit there and look at ethanol and say, this is stupid. You're talking about food prices being higher. Well, if we didn't have ethanol, and they're trying to push it more to the solar and the wind. I think that's something we need to be very concerned about. No idea on the date, I have no idea if it actually happens, but there's a morning we could wake up and CNN and Fox and Drudge and everybody else is sitting there saying, Senate's going to do away with the ethanol mandate. And all of a sudden now, we're going to raise 93 million acres of corn next year. We used to raise 78 million. Imagine the nitrogen demand loss, phosphate demand loss, potash. What happens to all that land that's switched over to corn production? Everything changes overnight. I think it's something we very much need to be concerned about. Now, Corn Belt states, they're fine. It's called Corn Belt for a reason. North Dakota, Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, places like that are raising corn that weren't raising corn a decade ago, they need to be nervous.
Okay, this is the last call for questions, and I see there's a question.
Lee Lasby from Pent, Saskatchewan. Dr. Ryan, you mentioned there were, in your talk, vendors of ag disinformation. Vendors of ag disinformation. So, I just wonder, I think about that and just my little experience walking into Whole Foods at times. It sort of feels like I'm walking into a cult of all these really virtuous people that want to save the world. And, so I guess my question is, who are the vendors of ag disinformation? Do we know who they are?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I don't have the top, I think Dr. Oz, there was Dr. Mercola, there's a few of them that have been prolific. Nature, Health Ranger or whatever. Anyway, there's a consistent group of these top, like I think we published the top 50. Like it's in the paper is open access. I know you don't want to read it unless you want to go to sleep, but the table's there. We have a list of them, and you can see that They're very much active, and they're inactive in other spaces too. It's not just agriculture, it's about disinformation, right?
So where do we go to see this list?
Well, I can provide you with the link.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
is that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, and I also, what we tried to do when we published, which we all try to do in Bear now with science, as soon as any of our scientists publish, we try to translate. So that, the point that we were talking about is translating the science in a way that's meaningful. So we've got podcasts on it. Like I went on Kevin Folta's podcast and talked about it. Like we've got lots of those kind of resources. So what I could do is I'll get a list together and send it to Caitlin, and you can have a
Okay,
look
thank
at
you
that.
very much.
Yeah.
We can send it out to everybody who registered for a convention. Right, Shannon? Awesome. I like to promise things and then ask if that can be done. Any other questions? Okay, so we are going to try to wrap it up a little bit quicker just because we have a lot of things to do before we have to board the bus. But any final words that either one of you guys want to say? Oh,
Oh, I thought you started to raise your hand.
Yes, directed to Dr. Ryan, and with the new powerful computers coming out and algorithms, is that going to change things in the future, like AI, as this becomes more sophisticated? Is the landscape going to change on misinformation and disinformation?
Well, it already is evolving. Like now you can see deep fakes. Like if you go onto TikTok or some of those accounts, you can find the Tom Cruise deep fake. It looks like him. It sounds like him. It is not him. There's also a Keanu Reeves one. Like fake information is getting way more sophisticated all the time. So yes, that's going to change. The other thing that's gotten really, I'm going to bore you a little bit, but when I was in university, we had to do surveys. I don't know if you ever did this, but then you have to transcribe them. It was a pain in the butt. But now you don't have to transcribe, right? Like it's automatic. Like you can collect information and it's automatic. So now all of a sudden what you can do is you got that right like this, plus you can start conducting text-based analysis about things and pull information from there. So this data science, digital science stuff, your kids, grandkids, encourage them to go into this because there's going to be no end of jobs in this. But yeah, it's constantly evolving. So who knows what's going to happen, 10 years from now.
okay. Do either one of you guys want to say any final words?
My only thing is, in terms of the fertilizer market, like I said, stay vigilant. Unfortunately, I don't think these choppy roads are going to get any smoother. And with some of these markets, especially like the nitrogen, it gets worse. In the past, we had excess inventory sitting around the world. So when you would have a production hiccup, it's okay. It's a little like, driving a brand new Chevy Denali down a dirt road. You hit a big old bump, you don't even spill your beer. The way we're going, with the minimal inventories we're going to have left, as close as that is going to be, it's going to be like your old junker pickup. You ain't got shocks left in that sucker. You hit a bump and you're all over the dang place. That's where I see this thing going. It's very much something that's going to continue to get worse before it gets better. Look for those opportunities, guys. This isn't something where you walk in once or twice a year for your fertilizer needs. This isn't something you walk in once or twice to sell your grain. This is something we need to be looking at daily, weekly, monthly. It needs to be something that is ingrained in us every single day. I mean, there's some of the stuff I wake up every morning. What's DEES 23 corn? What's European Dutch TTF natural gas price? Where are operating rates? Where are this? I mean, it's the first thing I wake up to. It's what we've got to get to. And talk to your suppliers. Listen, that's a big, big one I've been chatting about. Everybody thinks, oh, I'll just show up November 1st and that fertilizer will be waiting for me when I walk in the door and grace them with my check. Guys, you look at some of this stuff. Phosphate and potash has been in a free fall since late March, April. That means we don't want to touch it, rightfully so. Well, guess who else doesn't want to touch it? The retailer. They're not going to just put tons in there just for the heck of it, knowing, oh, it might drop $100 a ton, but I'm going to do right by my customers. They got to stay in business. And they're doing everything they possibly can, but their hands are tied as well. So these conversations with our suppliers, and I get it, I don't like giving our information to our people either, because it's going to get used against me, or it has in the past. But these conversations need to be going forward. If I'm not going to do it in the fall, or if I'm going to put it on the fall, but I don't want to buy it yet, I at least want to go to my supplier and say, here's what my game plan is. All goes well, I'm going to come in here, November 15th, we're going to get it put on, we're going to knock it out. At least then they can put together a game plan and be ready for you. We cannot wait until the last minute. As tight as everything is getting, waiting until the last minute, the market's always gotten things done, right? The farm gate has rarely ever seen below the surface of the water. It's a little like a duck on water. You guys have seen it from above the water, and that duck glides effortlessly across the water, just a little bit awake. Underneath, that duck is kicking like hell. We've got to have these conversations, because I am scared to death that we are going to have that worst-case scenario we've always theorized about, where we show up and say, I'm ready for my stuff, and we're like, sorry. Stay on top of it, guys.
And mic drop. Awesome. Well, thank you, Cami and Josh and UPL for sponsoring this great discussion.